The basement of Lubyanka prison smelled of damp concrete and fear. Valery Martinov stood facing the wall, hands cuffed behind his back, while a KGB officer chambered a round into his Makarov pistol. May 28, 1987. 3:47 in the morning, the hour when the Soviet state conducted its executions. Martinov was 41 years old, a KGB lieutenant colonel, father of 2. For 5 years, he'd been passing intelligence to the CIA and FBI under the code name Gentile. He'd exposed 50 Soviet intelligence officers operating from the Washington embassy. He'd revealed technical secrets, scientific espionage operations, KGB methods and targets. Then Aldrich Ames sold his name to Moscow for $50,000. The officer raised his pistol, aimed at the base of Martinov's skull. Standard KGB execution protocol: one shot, instantaneous. The trigger squeezed. The gunshot echoed in the concrete chamber. Martinov's body collapsed forward. Blood pooled on the floor. His wife Natalia would learn of his death 9 days later. Not through official notification, through whispers, through the sudden absence, through the way neighbors stopped making eye contact when she walked past. His children, Alexander and Anna, would grow up knowing their father had been executed as a traitor, but never knowing the full truth of what he'd done or why he'd done it. Valery Martinov was the first of at least 10 Soviet agents betrayed by Aldrich Ames, but he wouldn't be the last. 2 years earlier, April 16, 1985, Soviet Embassy, Washington, D.C. Aldrich Hazen Ames walked up the steps of the Soviet Embassy on Tunlaw Road carrying a manila envelope. He was 43 years old, 31 years with the CIA, currently working in the Soviet East European Division's counterintelligence branch. Access to the identities of virtually every Soviet citizen spying for the United States. He was also broke. His first marriage had ended in expensive divorce in 1981. He'd met Rosario Casas Dupuy in Mexico City in 1983, Colombian, beautiful. Expensive tastes, designer clothing, jewelry, travel. His CIA salary of $60,000 couldn't keep up with her credit card bills. He owed approximately $40,000. His bank account was overdrawn. Collection agencies were calling. He needed money fast. The envelope in his hand contained one piece of information: the name of a Soviet GRU officer whom the CIA had recently recruited. Not one of the important ones. A throwaway. A test to see if the Soviets would pay. Ames approached the embassy reception desk. "I need to speak with someone in the KGB residence office. I'm a CIA officer. I have information to sell." The receptionist's expression didn't change. She picked up a phone, spoke in rapid Russian. Within 5 minutes, a man appeared. Middle-aged, unremarkable appearance. KGB officer, certainly, though he didn't identify himself. They moved to a private room. Ames explained his proposal. He was a CIA officer with access to Soviet operations. He needed money. He could provide names, operations, intelligence. In return, he wanted $50,000. The KGB officer listened without expression, then asked, "What proof do you offer?" Ames handed over the envelope. The name inside. The officer took the envelope. "We'll be in contact." The meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. Ames walked out of the Soviet embassy, returned to his office at CIA headquarters, sat at his desk and waited to see if the Soviets would pay. They did. June 13, 1985. Chadwick's Restaurant, Georgetown. The meeting was scheduled for 1:00 p.m. Chadwick's was a casual American restaurant on the Georgetown waterfront. Busy, loud, lots of patrons coming and going. Good for clandestine meetings because nobody paid attention to anyone else. Ames arrived 10 minutes early, ordered coffee, scanned the room. At 1 exactly, a man entered, late 30s, Slavic features. He wore a gray suit and carried a newspaper under his arm. He approached Ames's table. "Mr. Robert?" The KGB used pseudonyms for operational meetings. "Yes." The man sat down, placed the newspaper on the table between them. Inside the newspaper, $50,000 in cash, payment for the initial information Ames had provided. "We are very interested in continuing our relationship," the man said. His English was good, slightly accented. "We would like to know what else you can provide." Ames had prepared for this moment. He'd spent the previous 3 weeks compiling a list. Every Soviet agent he knew about, every operation he had access to, the entire CIA network inside the Soviet Union. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a package. Thick, dozens of pages. Names, code names, operational details, the identities of more than 10 active Soviet agents working for American intelligence. "This is everything I have access to currently," Ames said. "There's more I can provide over time." The KGB officer took the package, didn't open it, didn't react. Professional discipline. "We'll review this. If the information is as valuable as you suggest, compensation will reflect that." "How much?" $2 million over the course of our cooperation. Payments will be made systematically. Some now, some later. Some held in accounts you'll be able to access. $2 million. Ames tried not to show his reaction. That was more money than he'd imagined. More than enough to pay off his debts and fund Rosario's lifestyle indefinitely. "Agreed," he said. The KGB officer stood, picked up both the package and the newspaper. "We'll be in contact with instructions for future meetings. You should take precautions. Vary your routes. Watch for surveillance. The FBI is competent." He walked out of the restaurant. Ames sat alone at the table. He'd just sold out the CIA's entire Soviet network. He'd signed death warrants for at least 10 people. And he'd done it for money. He picked up his coffee, drank. His hands were steady. September 1985. Moscow. The arrests began quickly and quietly. Valery Martinov was recalled to Moscow in September 1985, ostensibly to serve as part of the honor guard for returning KGB defector Vitaly Yurchenko. A prestigious assignment. An honor. It was a trap. Martinov arrived at Sheremetyevo Airport on September 24th. KGB officers were waiting. They escorted him not to debriefing but to Lefortovo prison. The interrogation lasted 3 days. They showed him evidence, communications he'd had with the FBI, meetings with his handlers, dead drops he'd serviced. The KGB had meticulously documented everything after receiving Ames' information. "You have betrayed the Soviet Union," the interrogator said. "You have sold state secrets to American intelligence. The penalty for treason is death." Martinov didn't deny it. What would be the point? They had everything. They knew everything. Aldrich Ames had provided them with a complete roadmap of his espionage activities. "I did what I thought was right," Martinov said. The interrogator closed the file. "The court will decide what is right." The trial was held in secret. Military Collegium of the Supreme Court of the USSR. No defense attorney, no witnesses. The outcome predetermined, guilty, death by firing squad. Martinov was held in Lefortovo for 20 months while his appeals, purely procedural, worked through the system. He knew they would fail. Everyone knew. May 28, 1987, 3:47 a.m. Execution. His body was cremated. His family received no remains. Just notification 9 days late that Valery Fedorovich Martinov had been executed for treason against the Soviet state. The pattern repeated. Sergei Motorin, KGB officer in Washington, recruited by the FBI in 1980. Codename Gauze, recalled to Moscow October 1985, arrested, tried, executed 1988, 1 bullet to the head, Lubyanka basement, Adolf Tolkachev, Soviet aviation engineer, provided technical intelligence on Soviet aircraft systems to the CIA for 7 years. Arrested June 1985, tried. Executed September 1986. His contributions to American understanding of Soviet aviation capabilities died with him. The casualties mounted through 1985 and 1986. The CIA watched its Soviet network collapse. Agents disappeared. Operations went silent. Sources stopped communicating. And in Moscow, in the secret chambers where the KGB conducted treason trials, the executions continued. 1 bullet, 1 death. Over and over. All because Aldrich Ames needed money for his girlfriend's credit cards. July 19, 1985. Moscow. Oleg Gordievsky, KGB London resident and one of British intelligence's most valuable double agents, went for his morning jog. He'd been recalled to Moscow in May under the guise of routine consultations. But something felt wrong. The questioning was too aggressive. The suspicion too obvious. Someone had told Moscow he was a British spy, that someone was Aldrich Ames. Gordievsky had been interrogated for weeks. The KGB suspected him but lacked definitive proof. They'd drugged his tea with chemicals designed to make him confess. They'd threatened his wife and children. They'd kept him under constant surveillance, but they couldn't prove it. And without proof, they couldn't arrest him. Not a senior KGB officer. Not without risking political embarrassment. Gordievsky knew his window to escape was closing. He activated Operation Pimlico, the emergency exfiltration plan British intelligence had put in place years earlier for exactly this scenario. On July 19th, during his morning jog, Gordievsky evaded his KGB surveillance tail. It took careful planning and practiced tradecraft. He ducked through alleys, changed direction unexpectedly, used Moscow's crowds and metro system to lose them. Once clear, he boarded a train to Leningrad, then traveled south toward the Finnish border. At a prearranged spot near Vyborg, he waited. 2 British diplomatic cars appeared. They'd spent hours losing their own KGB surveillance. The operation was extraordinarily dangerous. If caught, the diplomats would be expelled. Gordievsky would be arrested and executed. "Get in the trunk," one of the British officers said. Gordievsky climbed into the boot of a Ford Sierra. Cramped, dark, hot. The lid closed above him. The car drove toward the Finnish border. 80 kilometers. Approximately 1 hour. At the border checkpoint, Soviet guards searched vehicles systematically. They had dogs trained to detect hidden passengers. The trunk was an obvious hiding place, but the British had planned for this. The diplomat's wife held a baby who'd been given a mild irritant to make it cry. She'd also carried dirty diapers in the car, creating a smell that overwhelmed the detection dogs. When guards approached the Ford Sierra, the crying baby and awful smell deterred thorough inspection. "Move along," the guard said, waving them through. The car crossed into Finland. 15 minutes later, in Finnish territory, the trunk opened. Gordievsky climbed out, blinking in the sunlight. Free, alive. He was the only one of Ames' betrayed agents who escaped execution. But the memory of those weeks in Moscow, knowing the KGB suspected him, knowing they could arrest him any moment, would haunt him for decades. December 1985, CIA headquarters, Langley. The losses were catastrophic and impossible to ignore. Multiple Soviet agents arrested or executed within months of each other. Operations compromised simultaneously. The pattern was too concentrated to be coincidence. Burton Gerber, chief of the CIA's Soviet East European Division, convened an emergency meeting with counterintelligence officers. "We're hemorrhaging sources," Gerber said. "I want explanations. What the hell is happening?" The initial theories focused on technical compromise. Maybe the KGB had penetrated CIA communication systems. Maybe surveillance had detected dead drops or meeting sites. Maybe the Soviets had developed new counterintelligence capabilities. But as the investigation progressed, technical compromise seemed increasingly unlikely. The agents being lost were too diverse. Different cities, different communication methods, different handlers, no common technical factor, which left one terrifying possibility: a human source inside the CIA, a mole. The task force began compiling lists. Everyone with access to information about the compromised operations. The lists contained hundreds of names: CIA officers, FBI personnel, Allied intelligence services. Aldrich Ames was on those lists, but so were many others. And in 1985 and 1986, nothing specifically pointed to Ames as particularly suspicious. He'd had access to the compromised information, yes, but so had dozens of other people. He drank heavily, but alcoholism was common in intelligence work. He'd had financial problems and a difficult divorce, but so had others. The investigation stalled. No smoking gun, no definitive evidence, just devastating losses and unanswered questions. Meanwhile, Aldrich Ames was getting rich. August 1989, Arlington, Virginia, the first close call. FBI Special Agent Dan Payne sat in an unmarked car 3 blocks from Aldrich Ames' house. The mole investigation had narrowed its focus. After years of analysis, Ames had emerged as one of 5 suspects with access, opportunity, and, most importantly, suspicious financial activity. The FBI had been watching him for 3 weeks. Surveillance teams rotated shifts. They documented his movements. They photographed everyone he met. On August 17, 1989, at 7:42 p.m., Ames left his house. He walked to his Jaguar, started the engine, then sat there for 2 full minutes, engine running, not moving. Payne watched through binoculars. What was Ames doing? Then Ames turned off the engine, got out of the car, walked back into his house. 15 minutes later, he emerged again, got back in the Jaguar. This time, he drove away immediately. Subject departing. Payne radioed to the follow team. But as Payne pulled out to follow, Ames suddenly made an abrupt U-turn. He drove back past the surveillance car, slowed down, looked directly at Payne through the window. Their eyes met. Payne's heart raced. Had Ames spotted him? Was the surveillance blown? Ames accelerated away. The follow team reported he drove to a grocery store, bought milk and bread, and returned home. That night, Payne reported the incident to his supervisor. The surveillance was suspended for 2 weeks to avoid spooking Ames. They'd come within seconds of blowing the entire investigation. October 1990, Bogota, Colombia. The warning. Aldrich Ames sat at an outdoor cafe in the Zona Rosa district of Bogota. He was ostensibly visiting Rosario's family, actually meeting his KGB handler. At 2:34 p.m., a man approached his table. Viktor Cherkashin, KGB counterintelligence chief. Ames had been working with him since 1985. "We need to talk," Cherkashin said, sitting down without invitation. He spoke quietly, urgently. "Moscow Center believes the Americans are investigating you. We don't have confirmation, but there are indicators. Questions being asked, financial records being reviewed." Ames felt ice in his stomach. What kind of indicators? The kind that suggest counterintelligence focus. You need to be careful. Vary your patterns, watch for surveillance. If you see anything suspicious, abort all contact. Cherkashin slid an envelope across the table. $50,000, in case you need to disappear quickly. The meeting lasted 8 minutes. Ames walked back to his hotel, his mind racing. Were they really investigating him? Or was this KGB paranoia? He'd been so careful. Varied his routes, used tradecraft, never got sloppy, but the warning was real, and Aldrich Ames, for the first time in 5 years, felt genuinely afraid. 1989-1992. The wealth nobody questioned. The KGB paid Ames systematically and generously. Cash deliveries during trips to Bogota, deposits into Swiss bank accounts. By 1989, he'd received approximately $1.8 million. By 1992, over $2 million spent it conspicuously. 1989, purchased a house in Arlington for $540,000. Paid cash, didn't take out a mortgage, just wrote a check for the full amount. His colleagues at CIA noticed. Mid-level officers didn't buy $500,000 houses with cash. Rick must have inherited money, someone said. Maybe his wife's family is wealthy, another suggested. Nobody investigated. Ames bought a white Jaguar XJ6, new, approximately $40,000. Drove it to work at CIA headquarters every day. "Nice car, Rick," colleagues would say. "Thanks," Ames would reply. "Got a good deal." He and Rosario traveled extensively. Bogota, Caracas, Zurich. Expensive hotels. First-class flights. Bills totaling tens of thousands of dollars. Rosario wore designer clothing and expensive jewelry. Their lifestyle screamed money. Far more money than a CIA salary could provide. And still, nobody seriously investigated. But the FBI hadn't given up. They were closing in. Slowly, methodically. Building a case that would be ironclad. October 12, 1993. The chalk mark. FBI surveillance agents watching Aldrich Ames' neighborhood in Arlington noticed something unusual. At 8:47 p.m., Ames left his house, walked to a nearby intersection, approached a mailbox, reached out and made a chalk mark on its side. A single horizontal line, white chalk, visible in streetlight. Then he walked back home. The agents photographed the mark, documented the time, analyzed the pattern. A chalk mark was classic espionage tradecraft, a signal to handlers that a meeting was needed or that information was ready for pickup. The FBI had been investigating Ames intensively since early 1993. Financial analysis had revealed his unexplained wealth. Surveillance had documented suspicious behavior. They'd searched his trash and found draft messages to his KGB contacts. But the chalk mark was the first time they'd observed him using active espionage tradecraft. "We've got him," the lead FBI agent said. November 1993, Bogota, the final meeting. FBI surveillance followed Ames to Bogota in November 1993, ostensibly visiting his wife's family, actually meeting his KGB handler. The FBI agents couldn't arrest him in Colombia. Jurisdictional issues, diplomatic complications, they could only watch and document. On November 17th, surveillance observed Ames sitting at an outdoor cafe. At 2:34 p.m., a man approached his table. Slavic features, mid-40s. They spoke briefly. The man handed Ames an envelope. Ames handed the man a package. The meeting lasted 8 minutes. The envelope likely contained money. The package likely contained classified CIA documents. The FBI photographed the entire encounter. They now had visual evidence of Ames meeting with a suspected Russian intelligence officer and exchanging materials. The case was solid, but they needed more. They needed to catch him with the evidence. They needed irrefutable proof that would stand up in court. February 21, 1994. The arrest. Aldrich Ames was scheduled to travel to Moscow on February 22 for a CIA conference. The FBI couldn't allow that. If he reached Moscow, he'd never come back. The Russians would protect him. The arrest had to happen before he left. FBI planners coordinated with the Department of Justice. They reviewed all evidence, financial records, surveillance photographs, the trash pulls, the chalk mark, the Bogota meeting. Everything pointed to Ames as a Russian spy. but they wanted to catch him with classified documents in his possession to eliminate any possible defense. On the morning of February 21st, FBI agents positioned themselves along Ames' route to work. Multiple vehicles, dozens of agents. They'd block the road, surround his car, give him no chance to escape or destroy evidence. At 8:47 a.m., Ames left his house, kissed Rosario goodbye, got into his white Jaguar, started the engine. He pulled out of his driveway and headed toward CIA headquarters, same route he drove every day. 2 blocks from his house, he approached an intersection. FBI vehicles suddenly appeared from side streets. They blocked his path. Agents emerged with weapons drawn. FBI, turn off the engine. Put your hands where we can see them. Ames froze. For a split second, his mind calculated options. Run, fight, try to destroy evidence, but he was surrounded. 20 agents, weapons trained on him, no escape. He turned off the engine, raised his hands. Agents approached, opened the door, pulled him from the Jaguar, handcuffed him, read him his rights. "You're making a big mistake," Ames shouted. "You must have the wrong man." The agents said nothing. They'd been hunting this moment for 8 years. They had the right man. They knew it. He knew it. Simultaneously, other FBI agents arrested Rosario at their home. She'd known about his espionage. She'd helped him. She'd be charged with conspiracy. By 9:15 a.m., both were in FBI custody. The case was closed. The interrogation. Ames initially denied everything, claimed the FBI had made a mistake, insisted he was innocent, but the evidence was overwhelming. Financial records proving he'd deposited millions from unknown sources. Surveillance photographs of him meeting Russian intelligence officers. Documents recovered from his trash showing communications with handlers. He couldn't explain the $540,000 house paid in cash. Couldn't explain the Jaguar. Couldn't explain the Swiss bank accounts. Couldn't explain the chalk mark or the Bogota meeting. Faced with life in prison or potentially death penalty, Ames' resistance crumbled. He began talking, admitted compromising virtually every Soviet agent he'd known about, described his recruitment by the KGB, explained the payment systems, detailed his meetings and dead drops, his motivations. Pathetically simple. I needed money. Rosario was expensive. I had debts. The Soviets were willing to pay. What about the agents he'd betrayed? The 10 people executed because of him? They knew the risks. They chose to spy. I didn't force them. The rationalization of a traitor trying to justify the unjustifiable. On April 28, 1994, Aldrich Ames pleaded guilty to espionage and tax evasion, sentenced to life in federal prison without possibility of parole. He's currently incarcerated at the Federal Correctional Institution in Terre Haute, Indiana. He's 83 years old now. He'll die in prison. The human cost: 10 executions, minimum, possibly more that remain classified. Valery Martinov, shot in the head, May 28, 1987. Left behind, wife Natalia, son Alexander, daughter Anna. His family eventually immigrated to the United States in 1995, carrying the stigma of traitor's family for years before escaping Soviet Russia. Sergei Motorin, executed 1988. Details of his death remain partially classified. His family's fate unknown. Adolf Tolkachev, executed September 1986. His technical intelligence on Soviet aviation systems had been invaluable to American defense programs. His death cost the CIA one of its most productive sources. Dozens more imprisoned. Careers destroyed. Families shattered. Operations compromised. And the culprit? A CIA officer who needed cash for his Colombian girlfriend's credit card bills. 100 operational compromises. 10 deaths. $4.6 million in blood money. That's Aldrich Ames' legacy, a greedy, mediocre intelligence officer who destroyed lives for money and will die forgotten in a federal prison cell. But the men he betrayed, Martinov, Motorin, Tolkachev, and others whose names remain classified, their sacrifices and their deaths deserve to be remembered. They died because they believed in something beyond themselves, because they opposed totalitarianism, because they risked everything to provide intelligence that might prevent conflict or protect lives. And they died because one man decided money was more important than honor, loyalty, or human life. That's the story of Aldrich Ames. Not a sophisticated spy thriller, just greed, betrayal, and the bodies left behind. The courtroom in the Eastern District of Virginia was silent as Aldrich Ames stood to hear his sentence. April 28, 1994. Judge Claude Hilton presided. Federal prosecutors sat at one table, Ames's defense attorney at another. The courtroom was packed with CIA officers, FBI agents, journalists, and family members of the men Ames had betrayed. In the back row sat Natalia Martinova, widow of Valery Martinov. She'd traveled from Russia to witness this moment, to see the man who'd sold her husband's name face justice. Judge Hilton looked down at Ames from the bench. "Mr. Ames, you have pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit espionage and tax evasion. Before I pronounce sentence, do you have anything to say?" Ames stood. His voice was steady, unapologetic. "Your Honor, I made choices. I accept responsibility for those choices. But I want to be clear. The people I identified as Soviet agents knew the risks. They were adults. They made their own decisions." In the back row, Natalia Martinova's hands clenched into fists. Her husband had been shot in the head in a basement in Moscow because this man needed money for his girlfriend's credit cards. And now he stood in an American courtroom claiming Valerie had known the risks. Judge Hilton's expression hardened. "Mr. Ames, your betrayal resulted in the deaths of at least 10 individuals and the compromise of hundreds of intelligence operations. You sold your oath, your country, and human lives for money. This court sentences you to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." The gavel struck. Aldrich Ames would spend the rest of his life in a federal prison cell, but the sentence couldn't bring back the dead, couldn't restore the families torn apart, couldn't undo 9 years of devastation. This is what happened to the people left behind. June the 6th, 1987. Moscow, the day Natalia learned. The knock came at 3:47 in the afternoon. Natalia opened the door to find Dmitry Sergeyevich, a former colleague of Valery's from the KGB, a man she'd met at office parties, a man who'd always been kind. His expression told her everything before he spoke. "Natalia Sergeyevna, may I come in?" She stepped aside. He entered, closed the door, spoke quietly. "I'm sorry. Valery Fedorovich was executed, May 28th. I thought you should know." The words hit her like a physical blow. Executed, past tense, already done, already over. "Where?" she managed to ask. Where is his body?" Dmitry looked at the floor. "There is no body. They cremate immediately after execution. Standard procedure. I'm sorry." No body, no burial, no grave to visit. Valerie had simply ceased to exist. "The children," she said. "Alexander and Anna, what do I tell them?" "The truth," Dmitry said. "Or a version of it. The KGB will come soon. They'll confiscate the apartment. You'll need to find other housing. I'm sorry. I wish I could do more." He left. Natalia stood in the middle of her living room, the apartment where she and Valery had lived for 12 years, where they'd raised their children, where they'd argued about ordinary things like bills and housework, where they'd made love, where they'd planned futures that would never happen. All of it about to be taken away. Alexander came out of his bedroom, 14 years old, growing into the man his father would never see. "Mother, what's wrong?" She pulled him close. held him, and told him his father was dead. June 29, 1987. Moscow, the confiscation. The KGB came 3 weeks later. 2 officers in civilian clothes, a truck waiting outside, workers to remove the furniture. The senior officer, a man in his 40s with cold eyes, handed Natalia a document. This apartment is state property allocated to KGB officer Valery Martinov. As Officer Martinov has been convicted of treason and executed, the allocation is terminated. You have 2 hours to collect personal belongings. Clothing only. No furniture, no household items. 2 hours? Natalia's voice shook. We've lived here 12 years. Where are we supposed to go? The officer's expression didn't change. That's not my concern. 2 hours. Workers began carrying out furniture. The sofa Valery had slept on when he worked late. The table where the family had eaten thousands of meals. The television they'd saved for 2 years to buy. All gone. Loaded onto a truck. Redistributed to someone deemed worthy of state property. Natalia and her children packed clothing into suitcases. Photographs. A few books. Anna's toy bear, old and worn. Can we take Father's books? Alexander asked, looking at the shelf of technical manuals and literature Valery had collected. No, the KGB officer said. Nothing that belonged to the traitor. Traitor. The word that would define their lives for the next 8 years. At 6 p.m., they walked out of apartment 42 for the last time. Carrying 3 suitcases. Nowhere to go, no money, no prospects. Behind them, workers were already painting over the marks on the walls, erasing evidence that the Martinov family had ever lived there. September 1988, Smolensk, the Motorin family. Irina Motorina sat in her parents' kitchen in Smolensk, 300 kilometers from Moscow, trying to explain to her daughters why they could never use their real name again. From now on, you're Irina Sokolova and Anna Sokolova, she told them. Not Motorina, never Motorina, do you understand? Her eldest daughter, 12 years old, stared at her. But that's our name, that's Father's name. Your father is dead, Irina said. The words tasted like ash, and his name is poison. If people know you're Sergei Motorin's daughters, they'll treat you like criminals, like traitors. You'll never get into university, never get good jobs. You'll be marked forever. But we didn't do anything wrong, 9-year-old Anna whispered. It doesn't matter, Irina said. In this country, guilt spreads like disease. One person's crime infects the whole family. She'd learned this lesson quickly after Sergei's arrest. Lost her job, lost their apartment. Lost friends who suddenly didn't recognize her on the street. The KGB had offered her a choice: cooperate, denounce her husband publicly, and she might receive minimal support, refuse, and face administrative punishment. She'd refused. Some lines couldn't be crossed. Now she worked at a textile factory. 12-hour shifts, exposure to toxic chemicals, 60 rubles a month. Barely enough for food. Her daughters attended school under false names, told classmates their father had died in an industrial accident, a lie they'd have to maintain for years. What did father do? Her eldest asked. Why did they kill him? He tried to do what he thought was right, Irina said, and powerful men decided that was treason. October 1990, CIA headquarters. The reckoning. The meeting room on the 6th floor of CIA headquarters was windowless, deliberately. What was discussed here couldn't risk being overheard. Burton Gerber, chief of the Soviet East European Division, sat at the head of the table. Around him, counterintelligence officers, case officers, analysts. 15 people who'd spent careers building the networks that Aldrich Ames had destroyed. Gerber placed a folder on the table. Thick, classified, the complete damage assessment. Final count, he said. 10 confirmed executions. At least 15 imprisoned. Over 100 operations compromised. Our entire Soviet network effectively destroyed. Silence. How did we miss this? One officer asked. Ames wasn't subtle. The money, the cars, the house. How did nobody see it? Gerber's expression was grim. Because we didn't want to see it. We assumed loyalty until proven otherwise. We trusted our own, and that trust cost 10 people their lives. He opened the folder, read names. Valery Martinov, executed May 1987, left behind wife and 2 children. Sergei Motorin, executed 1988, wife and 2 daughters. Adolf Tolkachev, executed September 1986, family fate unknown. 7 more names followed, some classified, some whose families' locations remained secret for their own protection. These weren't just assets, Gerber said. They were people. They trusted us to protect them. We failed. Another silence. Longer this time. What happens now? Someone asked. We implement reforms, Gerber said. Financial monitoring. Stricter compartmentalization. Better coordination with FBI. Everything we should have been doing all along. He closed the folder. But it's too late for the people in this file. They're dead, and we have to live with that. November 17th, 1995. Dulles Airport, Virginia. The immigration. Natalia Martinova stood in the arrivals hall at Dulles International Airport, overwhelmed by the chaos of America. Crowds, bright lights, English everywhere. A language she barely spoke. Alexander, 22 now, stood beside her carrying their suitcases. Anna, 19, clutched the documents the CIA had prepared for their immigration. A man in a dark suit approached. CIA officer. She'd learned to recognize them. Mrs. Martinova, I'm David Chen. I'll be helping you get settled. His Russian was adequate, not fluent but functional. Come with me. We have housing arranged, temporary until you find something permanent. They followed him to a car. Drove through Virginia suburbs that looked impossibly clean and wealthy compared to Moscow. Houses with yards, multiple cars, no bread lines, no shortages. This was the country Valery had believed in. The country whose values had seemed so incompatible with Soviet lies that he'd risked everything to help it. And it had gotten him killed. Chen drove them to a small apartment in Arlington, 2 bedrooms, furnished, modest but comfortable. The agency will provide financial support for 6 months, Chen explained. Enough time to learn English and find work. There are programs that can help. Why? Natalia asked. Why help us now? You couldn't save him. Chen's expression softened. I know. I'm sorry. Valery's death was a failure. Our failure. This doesn't make up for it. But it's what we can do. After he left, Natalia sat in the small living room of their American apartment and cried for the first time since learning of Valery's death. Not because she was grateful, not because America was beautiful or safe or free, but because she was 53 years old in a foreign country and her husband was still dead. January 15th, 2015. CIA headquarters. The Memorial Wall ceremony. The lobby of CIA headquarters was packed with people. Current officers, retired personnel, a few family members, and Natalia Martinova, 73 years old now, who'd traveled from her home in Virginia to attend this ceremony. CIA Director John Brennan stood before the memorial wall, the white marble carved with 125 stars, each representing an agency employee who died in service. Today, they were adding 3 more stars for agents betrayed by Aldrich Ames. We gather, Brennan said, to honor those who sacrificed everything in pursuit of intelligence that protected American lives and American interests. Some of these individuals were CIA officers. Others were foreign nationals who courageously provided intelligence at great personal risk. He paused, looked at the families present. Valery Martinov, Sergei Motorin, Adolf Tokachev. These three individuals provided intelligence that significantly contributed to American understanding of Soviet capabilities and intentions. They knew the risks, they proceeded anyway, and they paid the ultimate price. Natalia stood, walked forward, placed her hand on the new star representing Valery. Cold marble, smooth, perfect. It wasn't him, it wasn't his body. It wasn't the grave she'd been denied. But it was something. Recognition, acknowledgement, proof that he'd existed, that he'd mattered. She spoke quietly, in Russian, didn't care if anyone understood. "You were right, Valerie. You were right about everything. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand." She stepped back. The ceremony continued, but she didn't hear it anymore. May 3, 1994, February 2025, FCI Terre Haute, the prisoner. Aldrich Ames has lived in a 7 by 12-foot cell for 30 years. Wake at 6 a.m., breakfast delivered to his cell. 1 hour of recreation in a concrete cage, back to the cell. Lunch. Afternoon spent reading or watching television. Dinner. Sleep. Every day, the same routine, for 30 years. He's 83 years old now. Diabetes, high blood pressure, arthritis. The prison medical unit manages his conditions, keeping him alive to continue serving his sentence. His wife, Rosario, divorced him in 1996. She served her sentence, was deported to Colombia, and never contacted him again. He has no children, no visitors, no one who cares whether he lives or dies. In 2019, a journalist secured permission to interview him. Asked about regrets. "I regret getting caught," Ames said. "The agents I compromised, they were mercenaries, like me, just working for different paymasters. That's the game." The journalist asked about the families, the children who grew up without fathers, the widows who spent years in poverty. "That wasn't my responsibility," Ames said. "The KGB made decisions about how to handle the people I identified. I didn't execute anyone." Rationalizations, deflections, the mental gymnastics of someone who can't face what he really is. He'll die in that cell, probably within the next few years. His death will merit a few paragraphs in newspapers. Then he'll be forgotten, as he should be. March 2018. Arlington, Virginia. The burial. Natalia Martinova died on March 14, 2018, at age 76. Heart failure. Quick. Relatively painless. She went to sleep and didn't wake up. Alexander and Anna arranged a small funeral. A few friends she'd made in America. Some distant relatives from Russia who'd reconnected after the Soviet Union's collapse. No CIA representatives attended. Her connection to the agency had ended years earlier. They buried her in a cemetery in Arlington, purchased a simple headstone with their pooled savings. The inscription they chose, "Widow of a Brave Man." No name, no dates, no details, just truth. Valery Martinov had been brave. He'd opposed a system that crushed human dignity. He'd risked everything to provide intelligence he believed would prevent conflict. He'd paid with his life. And Natalia had spent 31 years carrying the weight of that sacrifice. Now she was free. 2024. The archives and the question. In CIA headquarters, in climate-controlled archives requiring multiple levels of security clearance to access, the complete Aldrich Ames case file remains classified. Portions have been released. Names of some betrayed agents, details of the investigation, information about the damage. But much remains secret, protecting sources and methods still relevant 40 years later. The file contains something researchers rarely see: human impact assessments. reports documenting what happened to the families of betrayed agents, where they went, how they survived, whether they're still alive. Most remain classified. Privacy protection, security concerns. But those who've accessed the files report a recurring pattern. Destruction radiating outward from each betrayal like shock waves from an explosion. Executions, imprisonments, families forced into poverty, children denied education, careers destroyed, lives derailed, all traceable back to one man's greed. The question that haunts the file: could it have been stopped sooner? The answer is yes. The signs were obvious. Ames' unexplained wealth, lavish spending, suspicious patterns. If the CIA had been paying attention, if someone had reported concerns instead of dismissing them, if financial monitoring had been rigorous, Ames could have been identified years earlier. How many executions could have been prevented? Impossible to say precisely, but some, maybe most. The failure wasn't just Ames' betrayal. It was systemic, cultural, an institution that was slow to suspect its own, that valued operational security over personnel security, that assumed loyalty until proven otherwise. The reforms implemented after 1994 have made similar cases less likely, but not impossible, because intelligence work requires trust, and trust creates vulnerability. The final accounting. Aldrich Ames sits in his cell at FCI Terre Haute. 83 years old, life sentence, no parole, he'll die there, soon. When he does, the news will merit a few paragraphs. Analysts will note his death. Historians will update records, then he'll be forgotten. But the people he betrayed won't be. Valery Martinov, Sergei Motorin, Adolf Tolkachev, 7 others whose names remain classified. 10 deaths, countless lives destroyed, hundreds of operations compromised, all because one man needed money for his girlfriend's credit cards. And in a cemetery in Arlington, a headstone reads, "Widow of a brave man." No name, no dates, no details, just a reminder that behind every intelligence operation, behind every betrayal, behind every statistic about compromised agents, are human beings. People who made choices, who took risks, who believed in something beyond themselves, and who died because one man decided money was more important than honor, loyalty, or human life. That's the story of Aldrich Ames. And that's why the stars on the memorial wall at CIA headquarters matter. They're not symbols, they're people, lives, families, sacrifices, and they deserve to be remembered.